On today's show of the Real Recovery Podcast, episode 37, we sit down with Judd Blackwell, who shares an unfiltered and deeply moving journey through addiction, trauma, and the road to recovery. Judd opens up about his early battles with substance abuse, the emotional scars that fueled his addiction, and the pivotal moments that ultimately led him to seek healing. His story of resilience, shaped by setbacks and breakthroughs, sheds light on the power of community and self-acceptance in the recovery process. Join us as Judd reflects on finding strength, purpose, and hope in his ongoing journey towards sobriety.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Recovery Podcast. I'm Julie, your co-host. On this journey of healing and transformation, together with my co-host Peter, we dive into the heart of recovery, sharing stories that resonate with courage and inspiration.
That's right, Julie. Each episode is a new chapter in this vast narrative of recovery, and we're honored to bring them to you. But keep in mind, the perspectives you'll hear are for informational purposes only and may not reflect the views of the podcast or our partners.
Indeed, while these conversations can be a powerful part of your recovery toolkit, they are not substitute for professional medical advice. We encourage you to seek guidance from your healthcare provider for any treatment-related decisions.
And if you're facing an immediate crisis, or if you just need to talk to someone who understands, don't hesitate to call the Recovery Crisis Line at 503-223-85. The number is also on our website. Help is available 24/7.
Now let's begin our episode
Of recovery, real recovery.
I'm so excited you're here.
Yeah, I'm glad you made it out. Now, do you live towards the club or do you?
I live in Northwest, right by the Alano Club.
Oh,
about
okay.
8 blocks from there, down on 25th and Raleigh.
So this is a trek. I appreciate you coming
Well,
this
I
way.
used to come out to Ruby when I was driving Max.
Okay.
So Ruby Yard is right up the street off of Burnside, 197th or something like that. So I'm used to coming out here a little bit. Like I stopped at the teriyaki shop that I used to go to when I was working out at Max. And I was
Nice.
like, yeah, happy teriyaki. Good to see you guys.
Some good
Makes me
stuff.
happy.
Yeah.
Are we recording?
Yeah, we're recording.
Welcome, Judd, to the Real Recovery Podcast. I'm really happy to have you here. The rules are there are no rules. You can swear. You can do whatever you want. We just want to hear your journey and not in 10 minutes like in an AA meeting.
Yeah. If you haven't listened to any of them, they really are just meant to be like listeners a fly on the wall, and they get to hear the true, open and honest
They've been
story
really
and-
authentic. We've been really lucky.
Yeah.
We've had some great people on.
I was listening to Kiki's this morning.
Yeah, hers was one of our first ones. Yeah. I will tell you, we had a recent one, Elton from 4D, and she melted my heart. There's some that we've had some from Sobriety, from Native American. We had Patio do Overeaters. We've had straight people, LGBT community. We've been trying to give them places to go, True Colors, 4D.
Hope and knowledge to the community. If anybody's out there struggling or just starting their journey, hopefully this will help them continue onwards. So I'm excited to hear your story and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I'm a little nervous to tell it, but I'm excited too a little bit. So,
Just pretend that you're talking to us and it'll be good.
Yeah.
all right, let it go.
Yeah.
All right. So I always feel like I should say I'm Judd and I'm a drug addict and alcoholic. All right, Judd. And
Hi, Judd. Welcome.
yeah, I was born in Vancouver. All my family's from Idaho, and they moved out here right before I was born. And my dad was a stockbroker, and my mom was a mom, stay-at-home mom or whatever. And I remember growing up and having some good memories, but it's mostly like the traumatic events that stand out from childhood for me. But I think I was predisposed. There's definitely alcoholism in my family, and I think I was predisposed to it. I remember I have a vivid memory of my parents giving me whiskey when I had a sore throat when I was about 3 or 4, and like feeling that burn and then the warmth. And I was like, this is interesting. Note to self, whiskey. And then later on, I don't know, when I was 6 or so, I was sexually molested by a neighbor kid, and he was being abused by his stepfather. And so he was just passing it on. And then I knew what anxiety and depression and shame were. And I remember it settling. We also have a family history of depression and being predisposed to that. I think that it just settled on me that this shit wasn't right. About the same time, I grew up in a Catholic home, going to Catholic grade school and so on and so forth. And I remember coming into 2nd grade and having first confession. And I remember they gave me a sheet for like mortal and venial sins. And I'm looking down for the sexual abuse and it's not even on the list. So I thought I was fucked. I just thought I was fucked. And because I thought it was my fault, as happens with her sometimes.
Right.
So I just remember from that day on thinking about not necessarily suicide, but definitely wanting it out. I knew it was a big secret to be kept from my parents. I thought they'd kick me out if they found out, which is pretty heavy for a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old. But that's also where I learned how to put on a mask and project what people wanted to see.
Right.
And
Amen.
yeah. And later on, I just remember having depression and anxiety a lot. And when I was 10, I had a bleeding ulcer from just the constant worrying that I was going to be found out or that I didn't know what it was at that point. I just knew that I thought that I was less than. And so that year that I found out I had a bleeding ulcer and started getting medication for that, I went that summer to my grandfather's farm in Ontario, Oregon, which is hot as fuck in the summertime. It is 110, 108. And we went for a float on the Snake River.
Oh, yeah.
And we were out all day, and he's not with us anymore, but he was an alcoholic, and he didn't think to bring anything but beer. So I got my first taste of beer, or not taste, I got my first cans of beer, just drinking all day on the river with my grandfather. And I remember coming back to his house, and none of that hidden, like the air conditioning in the house, and going to my room and just passing out. Like that was my first drunk was a blackout. And right before I passed out, I remember all that shame and guilt and self-hatred just was gone or was pushed away. So the burden was lifted for a little while. So I was bound and determined to be a blackout drunk from there on. I didn't know that consciously, but I knew that the relief, the medicine, or what I thought was. A few years go by and I'm in high school and I'm drinking to blackout every weekend. I'm doing pretty good. I went to Jesuit and did that.
Crazy.
Yeah.
No, so didn't really talk about it until 2 years ago.
Right.
Okay. But so my first day in Oregon, I'm coming from Massachusetts, and my mother drives me to Jesuit, and they didn't take girls yet because I was supposed to go to Jesuit, and I had gone to a Catholic school my whole life until then. And so I ended up at Sunset because she didn't want to drive over the bridge because we're brand new here to Central Catholic. But that's crazy you say Jesuit. I went to Sunset. Yeah.
Yeah. During that period of time, I started acting out in destructive ways and just hell-bent for death. But I was the all-American kid on the surface. Like I played football and I ran track, and I did field events. And then I was like the league champion for ski racing for a couple of years, like my junior and senior year.
Sports are important there too.
Yeah, they're very important there. And so all this stuff is what's on the outside. And on the inside, I can't go a day without thinking about suicide. It's just on my brain all the time just to check out. And like my freshman and sophomore year, I had a couple attempts at taking way too many pills and then getting my stomach pumped. And I remember my dad, we were like, nobody went to school after I OD'd one day and they pumped my stomach and we're all in the kitchen. And I still have charcoal from when they pumped my stomach, like on my chest and like where the EKG pads were. Like, it was just super fresh. And my dad was like, there's no way my son's going to see a psychiatrist. He's not seeing a head shrinker. We'll just deal with this in-house kind of thing. And I'm like,
the Catholic way.
The gift that keeps on me.
Seriously.
Yeah. And so we didn't deal with it. And then the second one came along and then we started to deal with it. And I went to a psychiatrist and I drank before I went enough to get pretty hammered, but nobody noticed. And I went and I told him whatever I thought he needed to know to get me out of going as soon as possible because it was not fun. And my drinking is increasing. And then I had decided not to do drugs of any kind, just drink. And because it was the 80s and cocaine was around at Jesuit High School, 87. Anyway, there was like coke and weed, and I was just, I don't know why, I just drew a line in the sand. But all lines are meant to be crossed at some point. Like, I'll never do that. And then you end up doing that as an alcoholic and an addict.
I had a lot of those.
Yeah, that's funny you say that because I was the opposite because my mother drank all the time that I didn't want to be like her, and my grandfather drank. So I wasn't going to drink. I've never drunk and drive to this day. So I've never blacked out drunk. I just thought IV shooting up was just a better option. It's crazy how how we rationalize
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And compart this thing that is not a square, but it's going in a round hole, and you're like, fuck it, I'm going to pound that thing in there,
Yeah.
even if it takes all night. Right during my junior year, my parents, I came home and they were sitting there. My brother was off at Stanford. My sister was at a Jesuit college, Santa Clara, down in San Jose. And so I was the only one left at home. And they're sitting there, and my dad's kind of a wreck, and he was this tough, or he is this tough guy from Idaho who was like an All-American tackle for the football team in college and an all-state wrestler. And anyway, he's a fucking mess. And my mom is all business, and that's total role reversal for them. So I'm like, what's going on? And she and he decided to split. It was her decision, and I was going to stay at home. And that was what was announced. And then my mom left. And then later on that night, my dad told me that she didn't really leave. She went and moved in with a guy she'd been having an affair with for a while.
Holy shit.
And we were taught that was verboten when we were growing up, that you don't cheat on spouses. By my mom, she drove it into us because we had other family members that had affairs, and she hated them. So she ended up reaping what she sowed.
Wow.
And when she wanted to continue to have a relationship with me. And I had wanted to have nothing to do with it. And so my drinking went from weekends to daily at that point. And I also was working in a pharmacy, and I had gotten my wisdom teeth extracted and found opiates and pain meds. And so it was just like, we rented out home care, beds, bathroom stuff for people who were convalescing at home or in hospice at home or whatever. And then when people would die, we would go pick them up, and there'd be like a table full of beds, and we would be hauling out the beds and stuff. And then we'd go, you want us to take care of these? We'll take care of these. And then we'd sit in the van and go through the prescriptions and see if they were what we were looking for. So I found like liquid morphine and morphine suppositories and whatever you can,
Yeah.
just stuff for people that aren't able to swallow anymore.
Yeah.
But I ended up combining those with alcohol, and I no longer had to drink like a case of beer. I could drink a half case of beer and have a little liquid morphine. And
I'd like to say you were very creative.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think like that in high school. I only smoked some weed, I think, a couple of times. Yeah.
you just never missed an opportunity to fuck things up. That's all.
Yeah.
So anyway, I started drinking daily, and my dad is suicidal all the time. And I still have those impulses, but I learned to keep them tamped down because it just creates way too much attention and people worrying about you, but also things like visits to a psychiatrist. And so I ended up finishing out high school and going off to University of Oregon. And
Not that's a drinking school.
no, not at all. There's very little partying. It's like Brigham Young almost. Yeah, it opened the doors. When I had no checks and balances like my father, or living at home, my drinking and drug use went through the roof or through the floor at that point. And I was just hell-bent for death. I didn't think about it that much. I just stayed in a constant blackout. I'd have 3 and 4 day blackouts, and I'd be driving the whole time everywhere. I'd wake up in Pendleton and Vancouver, British Columbia, and all over the place. And yeah, that was it. I didn't try and go to class. My nickname was Slee Stack, or Judd Bundy, which is not a very nice moniker because I only came out at night, and there was hell to pay if you got my way. And what the thing was is, like, in high school and growing up with a Jesuit education, I learned how to be there for other people, but not for myself. And I was active doing food drive and stuff like that in high school and really trying to give back. And all that just collapsed. When your 24-hour job is now staying fucked up, then there's no room for anything else. And so over the next year and a half, that's all I did. I flunked out of University of Oregon. So the next fall I enrolled in Oregon State, flunked out of Oregon State after winter term. And during that period, we had a cabin up on Mount Hood. We'd have parties up there once in a while. And we were up there, and this is 88. And 2 of my friends never showed up. And it was just weird because they always show up. And the phone rings at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we were still drinking from the night before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Holy shit.
yeah. And so I'm just barely available to answer the phone. You get real serious real quick when the phone, you're like,
Yeah.
and is it dad or what? And it was the mother of one of the 2 guys, and she said they were killed in a car accident by a drunk driver the night before. And that really rung my bell. I was having a hard time with that. And
I bet.
when we were coming back down the mountain, it was just outside of Gresham, that what had happened is this guy crossed over by Palmquist Road, and which is it's not a short span. You got to really try to get across that thing.
Yeah.
And hit them, and they didn't die during the car wreck. They ended up burning to death when the car caught fire.
Oh my gosh.
And so I was like, we see this kind of burnt spot on the ground where the car was on fire and shit like that. And I was just like, it's just very somber. But it didn't make me stop using it all. If anything, it helped drive it more. And
How sad though for you, them,
yeah,
their families,
and their
Shit.
families. And the thing was they were in one car and their girlfriends were in the car behind them. They saw the whole thing.
Wow.
So it really took a toll on them. But at the end of, or towards the end of winter term, in 88, or I guess it would be 89 at that point, I started realizing that I was coming to in my car a lot, asleep in my car or looking for my car wherever I ended up landing. And I'd walk around it. And I realized what I was doing is I was looking for blood and hair. And I just realized that I was the kind of drunk driver that killed my friends. He was in a blackout. He came out unscathed. And I drove in blackouts all the time. So that was the moment of clarity that started the whole recovery journey. Is that day I called my dad and said, I think I have a drug and alcohol problem. And he came and got me from Corvallis, and we moved my stuff back up to his house in Vancouver. But on the way, he stopped it. And he's not in recovery or anything like that. He just made the phone calls for me and found this place called the Blue Door in Vancouver. And it was below street level. So you go down these stairs and the walls get like yellower and browner as you go down from all the smoke. It was 89.
Oh.
And they have like smoke eaters in there. But this is when everybody just smoked like crazy in the meetings. And
I remember the Mono
Club.
Club. It was like a fucking...
Yeah. That door would open and it would be like...
Yeah.
A big smoke ring comes out from the door.
And there'd be 70 fucking people in there.
Yeah. I used to go to that 5:30 meeting pretty regularly in the evening. So anyway, I came down and I walked around the corner and there was this little Native American lady there, and she was probably like 4'11", and she just said, "You look like you need a hug." And she hugged me around the waist, and I just lost my shit. I started crying. It was just, I hadn't heard the message yet, but I got over the color of the walls real quick. And then I don't remember anything that I heard that night, but I remember hearing my story that night. I couldn't tell you who told it, but it was enough for me to come back. And so I'm living at my dad's, not doing anything but going to meetings and trying to sort out what was going to go down and what to do for work or whatever. And every night I'm having the same fucking nightmare where I wake up and I'm behind the wheel careening into my friend's car, and then they're on fire and they're screaming, "Why did you kill us?" And every night I'd wake up in sweats, just first 30 days, every night. And then on my 30th day, I picked up my coin and I went home that night and fell asleep. And then when I woke, and then I had a dream, but it wasn't the same nightmare. It was just them on the side of the road saying it's going to be okay.
Wow. What a lot to process as a young person.
Yeah. And it just, I don't know, that was another kind of moment of clarity, is that it's going to be okay. But I just needed to hear that from somebody. Not it. And I kept going to meetings. I was working on a dry drunk. I took phone numbers, but I never called them. I never got a sponsor. I never did any step work. When the coins that they give you and you get to stand up and people clap for you started to thin out, instead of one every month, it goes to 3 more months. And then it goes to 9 months, and it's another 3 months, and then a year. And I was just doing it by willpower, but I liked going to meetings. And so I was able to string together a 3-year dry drunk and act out in every possible way that you can other than drinking, in relationships and just being a tornado, whirling through. I dated old girlfriends, and just to prove that I was still an asshole, apparently, and did a good job of that. I thought I was trying to do a reboot, but what it was is I was still just as much of a mess. I hadn't dealt with any issues that had caused me to be a blackout drinker. And so at some point I ended up at 3 years with the idea of drinking. And at that point I thought I had done it sober and I had done it drunk, and I failed at both of them. And so I was like, fuck it. I'm going to be suicidal. I'm going to drink, and I'm going to act in a way. Unconsciously, I'm thinking this. So for a month in July, I'd drive around Portland. I got a Jeep with no top on it. It's nice weather. just drinking vodka out of the bottle. I got a meat cleaver underneath my seat. And my whole idea is that if I get pulled over, I'm just going to charge him with the meat cleaver and do suicide by cop. And somehow I never get pulled over. And
Meat cleaver.
a big one, like a double hand one. Because this isn't scary enough.
Right,
And
saying
a drunken,
like meat cleaver. Shut the fuck up. Yeah. Jail. No, yeah.
So that lasts for about a month. And I realize I'm just as fucked as when I stopped drinking 3 years ago. And I need to do something about it. And so I end up calling my dad again. My dad,
Bless your dad.
yeah, he's a taxi for good intentions. And so I ended up going to the dawn patrol in the basement of the Illuminates Club at 6:30 in the morning. And those people were way too fucking psyched about life at 6:30 in the morning for my little semi-drunk brain to deal with. But I kept going to meetings, or I started going to meetings again. And this time I was willing to do things differently. I was willing to get a sponsor. I was willing to hang out with people. I was willing to do step work. And I had to get beaten down. So at 23 and 92, I'm starting over again. And 1 to 2 meetings a day for about 3 years.
Sound like me.
Yeah.
There's 3 months and 22 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I threw myself in it, and I got a sponsor, started to work with him a little bit, and then he went off to work on a fishing boat in Alaska. So then I got another sponsor, and then he was taking care of his elderly mom and started taking her pills. So that guy was out.
Oh boy.
The next guy was one of the hip slick and cool dudes in AA who is always very dapper, dressed, smells good, looks great, but he was full of shit. And he would talk about his mistress and things like that. And I'm just
Lord have mercy.
I'm like, hey, fuck it, you're fired. So I was thinking I was having a hard run. That was the whole first year of sobriety. And I'm working like 60 to 70 hours a week as a delivery driver for Sheridan Fruit Company. And so there's no idle time. I'm either in a meeting at work or unconscious. Or there's still room for acting out sexually and food-wise and anything I can do to get out of my head. Because my head's still trying to kill me. Like,
Right. Yeah.
they said, I remember hearing somebody say something about like my head has a contract out on my ass. That it was just like constantly in this state. I didn't know how to think any differently. I didn't know how to hate myself less. I still felt tremendous shame about things that happened when I was 6 and every little mistake. I remember in that first 60 days of the second round, saying something in a meeting that was stupid that I thought was going to be smart, and it wasn't. And I still remember feeling the shame of that because that's collective. Like it just builds on it. And so, and that was the thing. I was the downtown delivery driver, and every time I drove over a bridge, which there are a few in Portland, I thought about getting out of the truck and jumping off. So that's all day long. It's a continuous rumination about dying and then just keeping myself busy and waiting to see what was next. So there's still a lot of self-will going on. But the way I found my first sponsor, who I love, Ray K, is there was a guy that came into the Illuminates Club to the noon meeting upstairs, surrender at noon, and he was drunk, and he was definitely like somebody that was living rough or sleeping rough, and he was grumbling and making noise, and as people who are drunk and shit do, but he's in a meeting. And so he obviously has a desire to stop drinking if he's in an AA meeting drunk. And what I saw was people having reactions that were not appropriate, like somebody almost threatening to take him out in the parking lot and whip his ass, and other people are just like, can't be bothered with this guy. But then I watched this dude who's not hip slick and cool slide off the couch, sit down, whisper something in this guy's ear, and sit next to him the rest of the meeting while this guy didn't say anything else for the rest of the meeting. And I didn't know what to do in that situation, but I knew what not to do. And I saw people do those things. And then I saw this man, Ray, take it upon himself to just be near this guy and talk to him like he's a human. And that guy was my sponsor. So
Nice.
I asked him to be my sponsor that day. And we did step work for a long time. He had a lot of experience with depression and anxiety as well. And we went through the steps, and he said, what we're going to do is we're going to read the book together, and then we'll talk about it. And I just thought, for the first time in my life, I said something that I was feeling instead of putting up the persona. Yes, okay, sure. And going along, I said, this sounds fucking stupid, And I just want to get that out there so that I can actually participate. I thought it was going to be lame to sit on a couch with another older man in recovery and just read the book.
It sounds kind of lame, but we all know it's not.
And that's the thing, is just like facing the things head on and exhausting my excuses or my feelings around it, and then they're just doing it anyway,
Yeah.
So we started doing step work, and I started having some relief. And about 2.5 years, I had a major depressive episode and just was unemployable. They were trying to do medication. I was in therapy. They were putting me on medication that wasn't working. So I was like a guinea pig that they were just throwing drugs at, or psychiatric drugs, and seeing if I could withstand the side effects, because I'm a large man and my metabolism or whatever for substances, we had to get these really high doses of things, and then the side effects would be just god awful. Yeah. And the whole time I'm suffering, I'm having panic attacks. I'm just a mess. And then I found the right medication, and it changed. It was a game changer for sure. Like, all of a sudden I wasn't underwater. I had my head above it. I still had to swim, but I didn't start the day underwater every day. And that just gave me the advantage to internalize step work, continue to work with others and sponsor people, and actually become employable again.
Sometimes I don't understand. I'm on medication for the first time ever, and it's 4 weeks waiting and then 6 weeks to see if it's an adjustment and then a switch. And I not only did that for anxiety, but I had a thyroid condition at the same time, and they changed the medication 4 times. And people don't understand that your brain during this time, I feel like it's an uneasy place until you get to that balance. And never being on medication before. And I'm just the opposite. Even though I'm a big person, medication impacts me drastically. They prescribed 300 milligrams of gabapentin 4 times a day. And I was like a horse in a fucking pasture. And I had to say, I can't take this. And so for those out there going through medication stuff, just know it gets better. It just takes time sometimes. Yeah.
This is 94,
Before it was-
95, and
yeah.
people would, if you mention meds, they would say, I'm not going to sponsor you if you take psychiatric meds, or you can't talk in this meeting if you're on psychiatric
Couldn't
meds.
talk about drugs usually back then either.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there were meetings like that. There were a lot of meetings like that. So it was this new age 90s or Renaissance woo, smudge, sage, I don't know, people looking at their health differently and their mental health differently. And so it was, I don't know, there were a lot of mixed messages going on. So it did take a while to adapt to that. And then I got on the right medication. And so I started working at a halfway house for teenage boys coming out of McLaren. And we were one of the only halfway houses in the state that took sex offenders. And so we had 17 or 16 beds in 2 houses in inner southeast. And I was just line staff when I started, and I ended up being the house manager before I left. I was getting triggered every day by the sex
That's what I
offenders.
meant. That's what I meant.
I didn't know it. And eventually I went to an executive director and just said, I don't know what's going on, but it's killing me. Like, it's not working out. And meantime, I'm trying to carry the message to these young kids that are because we had everything from like sex offenders to gangbangers to people who just made a bad decision and got caught. Yeah, one-offs, but are now in the system, and all sorts of stuff. And so anywho, this executive director sets me up with a therapist that specializes in sexual abuse. So the next year was probably the hardest I've ever had to work, going through this one. I can't remember what the name of the book was, but it had a workbook with it and stuff. And you start going through it, you're just crying while you're writing sometimes. And it's just awful. It's absolutely, but you just keep trudging, because what else are you going to do? Nobody else is going to lift it for you.
I had triggers this year for the very first time in areas that never had. And I sat there and bawled in IOP and calling Peter, this news story and stuff. It was this news story that really impacted me. And I think processing that stuff is exhausting. I was tired every day. I also feel like my brain is 25 pounds lighter. Like, I don't have to cry about it every time.
Right.
I don't have to stay in it. And it's hard. I don't think people realize how hard a work it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's some of the worst but best work that I've done.
Same.
But it's like, you really know you're grinding it out and that it's going to make a difference.
Yep.
Not necessarily right in the middle of it, but you get a sense that there's hope where there wasn't before.
Can I tell you that's just where I am now?
That's a great place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Just went through that, and I had met a girl on AA campus, and we started a relationship and lived together. She had a 4-year-old daughter when I came on the scene, and her dad wasn't around. I started parenting a kid while I was going through this stuff too. And we were together 10 years, and then we got married, and we've been married 20 years. So we've known each other for the last 30, and she's in recovery as well, which is good and bad.
I don't know. You took on another child. That's amazing.
I didn't know not to. Like, I thought for 1 second, I thought about excluding the relationship because there's a live baggage. There's something. And then it was just like, nope, it's not a reason to exclude anybody. It's not a deal breaker. It's just a new experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kept working at the halfway house. And right around 10 years, I gave up nicotine and still going to meetings 3 or 4 a week all the time. And still working with a sponsor and going through the steps more than once and having them focused on like a sex inventory for one, because I was so fucking jumbled as far as like sexuality and what sex means and what relationships mean. It got screwed up at 6, that I had to start making some decisions or compartmentalizing those ideas, and I made a mess of it. And so it took a while to get through some of that stuff. And right around 10, I finally got to the point where I didn't think I was going to die, or I didn't think I was going to kill myself. And I made a promise that I wouldn't do that anymore. And I totally forgot there was one experience when I was a couple of years sober where I had a buddy who was HIV positive, and then he ended up converting to AIDS. And I spent time with this guy every day and went through his dying process with him. And at some point I thought, man, this guy was tenacious. His name was Doug, and Doug just would fight it all day long. And I was going to a support group at Cascade AIDS Project, and it was the grimmest support group ever because everything was terminal at that point.
Was no meds.
They hadn't come out with a cocktail yet. They were trying, and people were using thalidomide and all sorts of stuff on the black market just to try and do anything to move the needle or to save their T cells. So I ended up just being like a daily caretaker for this guy. And at some point I realized it's really selfish of me to try and think about doing anything suicidally while I watch this guy
trying to
struggle
fight
for life.
so hard. Yeah.
To stay. And that was another epiphany in sobriety where I was just like, yeah, it's disrespectful. And then when he died, I remember he was really close with a lot of people and a lot of newcomers and stuff too, because he called them pigeons, but his sponsees were pigeons because they all huddled around him and and anyway, the thing that I realized is that when these big things hit, most people have a hard time dealing with them and don't necessarily do it in a healthy way. And some people use them as excuses to go back out, which is like the ultimate disrespect to me. And I'm just speaking from my own perspective. In that situation, I wanted to honor his life by continuing mine.
I actually feel the same way. I feel like I've worked so fucking hard in recovery that to give it up at this point would just be so wrong.
Yeah.
And I've gone through more shit in recovery than I ever went through fucking using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Prison was easy compared to some of the shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of this stuff is really so deeply entrenched in who you think you are or who you think you should be that it's really hard to extricate yourself from that situation or that thinking or that image of yourself. Because for the longest time, even in sobriety, I thought I was subhuman. I thought I was worthless than everybody else because of stemming from the sexual abuse. That's where it all started. Or it came in with a big bang and took out a lot of options for healthy childhood or whatever. So I'm ping-ponging around or whatever, but at about 10, I decided that I wanted to start a family. And I had never thought about that before. As far as I already had a family, have my own kid biologically. And because I love my daughter, she became my daughter. And I just wanted to see what a little me looked like, as well as just I thought I was stable enough to do that finally. But so we started having kids and didn't stop and had 5 over the next decade in sobriety. And
Holy shit is all I can say. Having one,
Yeah.
okay? Holy shit.
Yeah, so having 6 in the house all at once was trying. Actually, I think there was only 5 at the time because our oldest her name was Keisha, and she had moved out and gone to college by that time and was doing her own thing by then. But yeah, 5 kids in the house with 2 other people, so 7 people in the house is a lot. And that's its own
Oh, yeah.
little bag of nuts. And about every 7 years in recovery, I've had really bad depressive episodes where the meds failed or had to try something else. And so when I was 23 in sobriety, which is about 8.5 years ago or 9 years ago, I started depressive episode that was the worst I'd ever had. And I just couldn't get the right meds going, but I felt just despair that I'd never felt before. And I ended up losing about 75 pounds in 6 months. I would eat a Cliff Bar a day, and then I would lay on heating vents and just wait for the heat to come on to feel okay, and I would rock. It was awful, and it was very hard on my family. And I just remember coming to the point where I was going to stick a gun or a bottle in my mouth, and I picked the bottle, and I drank for one evening. And the next day I was at a meeting saying I relapsed. And it wasn't for lack of going to meetings. I was still going to meetings all the time. It wasn't for lack of sponsor work. I was working with a sponsor at the time. It was just that some of these things aren't alcoholism, and they need to be dealt with. And I probably should have gone into the hospital, but my ego would not let me. I had been in lockdown facilities before when I was suicidal as a youth, and I just hated that whole feeling of the door locking behind you. And that little part of my ego that I was still maintaining kept me from seeking the deep help that I needed. Somebody else to watch over me, somebody to say it's going to be all right. I just picked myself up and dusted myself off and started the trek to new meds, and found a guy who's an amazing chemist as a psychiatrist and keeps track of everything, just doesn't try to give you the oldest stuff possible, and got back on track, got some relief, enough so that I could string together days of sobriety, eventually becoming sober enough to hold a job again. And I had to move out of my house away from my family, and I lived with my brother for about 1.5 years, 2 years, just to get balanced again. And that was really hard, being away from the family. My main regret is that I missed a couple of years of the youngest kid. I mean, I was there and I would show up all the time, but it's not the same. And so part of it was just getting balanced, chemically balanced. And I don't know how to explain it to people who don't have depression, because it sounds a little wonky sometimes. And it's just like alcoholism. And if you don't, you don't. Trying to speak and sobriety to people who aren't in recovery, classically confusing for them.
Well, and I have to be honest with you. I think I stayed busy the first 25 years in sobriety, and I think it took getting emotionally, physically, and spiritually sick to get to the mental point and to understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand it fucking big time now, but I can't tell you that I did in the beginning. The best way I can explain it is you're off balance, and you just want to be balanced so bad.
I think first off, you don't even know you're out of balance. For me, it was like not knowing, just assuming I was fucked up, like I was born fucked up, like born bad or something. Then you get a little sobriety and you realize this is not you. These are not the sum total of your choices, but there's a mental illness that you have that goes along, dovetails with your chemical dependency and all the things that those brings. But at the same time, you got to do that work. You got to dig through it, and nobody else is going to do it for you. And that's good that nobody else can do it for you.
Right.
Because you have to earn that seat. And I've hit many a bottom in sobriety and had behavior that I'm not proud of. But not so much anymore. At this point, I have 8.5 years back after that one night. And I'm pretty present for my family. I'm pretty present for my sponsees. And I do what I can do. I wake up in the morning, I say the St. Francis prayer. I can always remember from when I was a kid, and we went to Our Lady of Lourdes in Vancouver was the parish. And they had this is the late 70s, like a little folk trio that would sing songs and all that stuff and have bad perms and just stuff like that. And the St. Francis prayer sung from a couple of a couple of people with jumbo acoustic guitars, which is what I always hear. And I still hear that every time I read that prayer in the morning or say that prayer in the morning, is that memory from my childhood. And the spirit in which it's delivered, and that you need to be there for others before you worry about yourself. Not in that weird codependent way, but it's about what you bring to the party,
Right.
what you bring to the table for other people. And I try to remember that. Sometimes it only lasts 10 minutes. Sometimes it lasts the whole day. And I can always circle back around and say it again if I need to. But I think that's probably the guiding tool that I use to try and be right-sized in sobriety and with my depression and anxiety, is let me forgive rather than be forgiven. Let me be there for someone else. And like I say, while you still retain self.
No, I think saying other-centered, right, is a good place to be, looking for a new job right now. I'm always happiest when I'm in service. So finding my place that way to find better balance and not worrying about a number for a corporate office has been, I'm not there yet. I'm hoping to be there, and not focusing on the money, but focusing on what I can do. It's a challenge to get to that mind state, but it is a beautiful mind state when you can stay in it. Yeah, it's just like when we do the podcast. Going through your memories helps process mine. I've cried during so many podcasts, and it's gotten me to a point of healing like I've never healed before. I would say the podcast has done more for me than anybody that listens to it. And Peter, too. We've talked about some shit. And crazy enough, your story really resonates with me. When you said Jesuit, I was like, holy shit. But yeah, I think being other-centered is a good place to be because it brings peace in
Right.
my brain does over time.
Well,
My brain is brilliant on its own.
I don't have that prayer per se that I say, but I do keep that. When I was drinking, I always would question why people were worried about me because it was all me. I was doing it to myself. I'm not doing this to you. So it wasn't until I got sober that I was like, oh, that was a little self-centered of myself. And whenever I have anxiety about I'm going to go chair a meeting or I'm going to have someone in my home to talk to, I do get anxiety from a lot of those moments, but I always hold that I'm there for them as much as they're there for me. I think that's what you're saying in a way, being there and remembering that I'm there at the meeting. I'm there to share. I'm there chairing because it might help someone else out there and
Can't
not
keep
be
it if you
so,
don't give it
yeah,
away.
not be so like, wow, I'm just too tired today. Or I can't get up there. I don't have it in me today. I have to push all that aside because my committee, and you talked about the committee and the break, mine is still a little bit loud sometimes. I have to really, okay, shut up, guys.
The committee showing up every once in a while and louder is a good indication that something needs to be tweaked or dealt with. Or for me, it's just, I don't have to go looking for problems in sobriety because they'll come to me.
Exactly.
If you stay sober long enough
Amen.
and do the work, then the things that you have that you've carried that aren't of any use anymore will raise their head.
Like when you said you were sober and it came to that, a drink or suicide, I think you made the right choice, just so you know. But I also think you don't know when it's coming. I'm grateful it came at 25 years sober, and I'm grateful it came not later because I haven't been able to trust. I can trust in our meeting. It was hard at first, but I can trust in our meeting. I can trust in the program. But we're talking about that checklist. My checklist to date somebody or live with someone is from here to Hawaii. And it's so big that I would never date anybody with children. That was a big one because then I don't have to kill your baby's mama and go back to jail for talking shit to me. I'm just saying the list was huge. It's still pretty huge. I hope to get there someday. But yeah, I'm glad I had so much sobriety when it was my time to process. Yeah.
It comes when it comes.
It's crazy and how it comes.
Yeah.
I lost weight like you. I lost 36 pounds in 2 months and had black under my eyes. I looked like it was horrible. Yeah.
I was not a hot mess. I was a cold mess. During that period, there's a state called anhedonia where you just don't feel anything anymore in depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there and I had never experienced that before where you're just numb to everything except for hate, except for the self-hatred. And it's not a good place to be.
Yeah, I thought I was going to die physically. My sponsor that I have now came to my house to sit with me 4 nights in a row. because I thought my head was going to explode. And I'd have him sit with me until it calmed down. And I'm thinking, what the fuck, right? And he said, you're taking a leave of absence from work. And I said, I'll do what the doctor says. And he said, no. And we went to the doctor's the next day and she said, you're most definitely taking a leave of absence. But I couldn't see it. I was so in it that I couldn't see it. God, he did.
That's what we have people for. That's why we build the community.
No, I agree with you. And it's crazy because my first sponsor of 23 years, I think he had it easy now. In hindsight, I might have called a lot in the beginning, and I didn't have a sponsor the first year. Two people said no. He was the third. And I just kept working the steps on my own and doing the best I could and going to meetings. And truly, the last 12 years he was alive, I went and picked him up every Friday, took him to a meeting. When he got sick, Izzy and I took a meeting to him. I get my sponsor that I have now. I'm in MRIs, puking at the doctors. This guy has had to go through more shit for somebody who was in recovery a long time. And I'm always like, holy shit, did you get me? Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
I appreciate your story. It's touched me in many ways. And one of the things that you mentioned was the time that you went down that yellowing walled brown into that clouded room and you heard your story. And that is something that has hit me many times and why going to meetings is so important, because you'll hear parts of your story or you'll hear things that remind you of your story. And also what you brought up about the car crash. And I drove blackout many times, and I look back with so much gratitude that I never had an incident in all those years of doing it. It's a miracle that I didn't kill myself or kill others from driving like that. So it's amazing. Every person we talk to, there's just little points and I'm like, oh yeah. And we're all so similar in so many ways, and yet we have such different stories, and it's a cool thing to explore. So I appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you and having this podcast and, and inviting me to come share. The one thing that I think, in just hearing my story again, told, sometimes you just need somebody to hold you and say, it's going to be okay.
You know what, so I just got done with IOP again, right? Except for this time I chose to go. It wasn't the doctor telling me you can't go back to work until you go, which helped me a lot. But I just tried to get better to go back to work to the same craziness. And working too much, talk about wrong. But there's a meditation, and I haven't been a big meditation person where Peter has it down. But there's this meditation, and it's the one I relate to the most. And she just says, you're safe. You're going to be just fine. And she says it over and over again. And now, like throughout the day, I tell myself, you're safe and you're going to be just fine. And I know for a long time, the relationship, the work, all has been based out of fear and shame. Climbing up the corporate ladder because I was so embarrassed I went to prison. Not being in a relationship because I'm scared. Not being, the sexual abuse hurt me and I didn't realize how bad. And it's crazy. I just avoided it versus dealing with it. And
it's like what you said about the masks. I really relate to that because that's how I made it through most of my life. Was I wore a mask for every situation so I could be a part of and blend in and hide everything that I was ashamed of and hated about myself. And removing that mask, that's part of what this podcast is for us going into it.
Like, we felt naked.
We had to take off that mask and be,
Yeah, and I wouldn't strip ever, not even skinny. And I will say, hopefully with the new job, I'm going to be so proud that I went to prison and I stayed out for 30 years. And so thankful that I've been able to stay sober and not be ashamed of it. I want to be like, I did it, you can do it too.
Right.
And it not be about money and a bougie title. And I didn't think I'd ever get there. I'm just saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that some of it, you just don't know how hard it's going to be when you dive in and you start doing it, but then the freedom you get on the other side of it. I can't explain it to somebody. Like, I have a sponsee that has a similar story, and we talked about going through some of this stuff, and it's just like, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna get through this. You'll feel better. And it's not to say that life is gonna be perfect or that it's gonna be pink cloud from there on out or anything.
Life is hard.
Sometimes it's harder because you don't have that substance to quiet everything. You got to deal with it head on and raw.
Yeah. The thing, I know for a fact that if I hadn't found alcohol, I would have been dead a long time ago. And it took care of the things in my head, the monsters in my sleep, that kind of thing, for a long time until it didn't.
Right.
And then when it didn't and I got sober, those monsters and demons were still there. And I've gotten the opportunity to work through almost all of them at this point. I don't know anything lurking at this point.
I think I'm almost there.
But I'm sure there will be something.
But by doing what you've done and what we're doing in our own, so yeah.
Well, I don't quote the big book, but the onion and peeling back the layer. Mine must be the fattest onion there ever was. I couldn't even imagine there was so many layers, but it's true. And I think if you think you got it all together, that's when you're going to lose it anyway. Because I don't know anybody, they might look like they do, but life has challenges, period. Yeah. I want to thank you for coming here, and I'm so happy to be in Studio H today. Seriously, we've been at 2 live events, amazing events, but Studio H, there's something, that's Peter's house. Yeah. Studio H, there's something for the intimacy and just having a conversation.
Yeah, I'd much rather just chit chat with someone.
Yeah, me
than
too.
Have to be interview mode.
I will say, interviewing somebody with a DJ full blast in the background was a new experience for us. Yeah, but
then the next time you are asked to chair, you could just say, "Here, let me just play this for you."
Yeah, exactly.
With my greatest hits.
You know what's so great about it? Like, I've known you for a while, and now I know you. Right. It's crazy. I've known Kiki for 27 years, but hearing her story in detail, it's made my family of choice so much richer and greater. And to know that, like,
makes you feel less alone, too.
Yeah, it does.
Every person I hear from, it makes me feel so much more a part of.
And blessed. Like, really blessed. Yeah. For everything I don't have, even. Thank you. I can't wait to get this mic out of here. And this is Julie.
And Peter with the Real Recovery Podcast, here with
Judd.
Yay.
Thank you, Judd. Any last words?
It's going to be okay.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks to each and every one of you for lending us your ears and hearts. Your engagement is what fuels our passion and keeps this podcast thriving.
We cherish the moments we share here and hope they resonate with you, whether you're on a daily commute, at the gym, or just taking a moment for yourself.
Make sure to head over to our website at realrecoverypodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to our newsletter for the latest insights and uplifting stories from our community delivered straight to your inbox.
Click that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player too, so you can keep up with every new episode. It's your support that keeps our conversation alive and meaningful.
And if our stories have touched you, consider using the donate button on our site. Your contributions, no matter the size, are deeply appreciated. They help us continue our mission of sharing hope and healing.
Join us beyond the podcast and follow our journey on social media. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. All the links are on our site, so you can stay connected and be a part of the Real Recovery community every day.
Your likes, shares, and comments not only spread the message of recovery, but also remind us that we're all in this together.
So, until we meet again, remember that recovery is a journey, not a destination, and we'll be here to accompany you every step of the way to recovery, real recovery.
Thanks for listening.